magnets. I mean, what is a magnet? What does it do? Well, a magnet basically is a material that attracts ferrous materials like metal, steel to be, cast iron. Anything that can be magnetized is a ferrous material. So non-ferrous means it can't be magnetized. So that's the difference between ferrous and non-ferrous. But when it comes to magnets, the reason we need magnets is the speaker has to move. It has to have an outward motion and an inward motion. Well, a speaker needs something to push off of. So you've got a coil of wire inside the speaker called the voice coil, which we got kind of a cutaway of a speaker over here. We'll show you closer in that just in a few minutes. But the coil of wire, as you pass energy through any wire, it develops a magnetic field around it. Well, that magnetic field is stationary as long as the current and the direction of the electric flow is the same. So the more power you run through a wire, the bigger and stronger the magnetic field. But you get to a certain point where you can no longer pass any more current through the wire, and it's actually going to break down, and then you have a burnt voice coil. That's kind of one of the things that happens with overpowering speakers. So you need a stationary force for that magnetic field to be pushing against or pulling against. And that's what the stationary magnets in a speaker, that's what they do. So they allow that speaker to push and pull, and we use AC or, alternating current, because in one direction you pass current through, it's going to push the speaker. You turn around, go the other direction, it's going to pull the speaker. And you vary that at, a high frequency, and the frequencies that you vary that, being, how many times a second it varies, is called Hertz. So 20 Hertz means that speaker is going to change directions 40 times a second, which 40 times at 20 Hertz, that means it's going to go up, it's going to change directions again, go back, and change directions again. So even though a speaker is playing 20 Hertz, it's actually changing directions 40 times a second. And that's what those magnets allow you to do. The more powerful the magnet, the better the whole geometry of the speaker, the better it's going to work, the more it's going to work, and the more powerful it's going to be. Now, one of the big misconceptions about speakers and magnets is the bigger, the better. You put the biggest, baddest magnet on a speaker, you're going to have a better speaker than one with a smaller one. Well, I've got an example in front of me right here. I've got one of our Power Sports speakers, and I've got one of our KS series speakers. And if you look at those two speakers carefully, obviously the Power Sports speaker's got a much smaller magnet structure than the KS series. So that means the KS speaker is much better, right? Not necessarily. It depends on the type of material. The other thing we need to consider is the magnet is part of a circuit. It's called a magnetic circuit. You have to have a good circuit. All the components must be there. They must be balanced. So the little speaker here on my left, which I think is on your right, the Power Sports speaker, that uses something called a neodymium magnet. Now there's several different types of materials. You have ferrite, you have cobalt, and those are forms of ceramic magnets. Then you get into El Nino magnets, which are not really used in audio. They're great to be used in a couple areas such as guitar pickups, electric motors, very small, concentrated, very powerful magnets. But once again, with the advent of some of the new technologies, they've really migrated away from, really common everyday use, and that's where we're going to see a lot of the ceramic magnets and a lot of the neo magnets are taking over. Now, there's good things and bad things about all magnets. So if you look at the back of this awesome half woofer, you've got a boot on the back of the magnet. Well, why do we put the boot on the back of the magnet? Is it just to make it look bigger? No, not at all. Is it to improve the performance? It doesn't even improve the performance of the speaker. But what the boot does, it does have two very, very important functions. The first one is it looks cooler. It looks nicer, because bare magnets are just kind of ugly and blah. They don't really look exciting, so we want to make sure the speakers look presentable, especially if you're going to flip them over and show the backsides of them. So that's the main thing that we use the magnet boot for. The other thing, which is kind of, one of those little subjects that people don't even think about, that magnet boot will protect that speaker. As we mentioned, the ceramic materials, ferrite, ceramic, cobalt, samarium, all those are a form of ceramic material, and we know from coffee mugs, if you drop a coffee mug on concrete, it's going to shatter. Same thing happens with the ferrite magnets. They can break, they can shatter, they can chip, so that magnet boot helps that magnet, in case you happen to bump it on a hard surface, it doesn't shatter or break the magnet or chip pieces off of it. A few pieces aren't going to affect it, but if you break big chunks of it off or break it in half, the magnet's pretty much worthless. So just like anything, magnets have an operating temperature range. like, liquids, if you go too low in the liquid, it freezes, like water will turn to ice. You get too high of a temperature, it turns into gas. So it changes its properties. What happens with magnets, usually when they get too hot, cold doesn't necessarily have a lot of effect, but when they get too hot, you start to lose the magnetism. And it really depends on what type of material you're using as to when they lose their magnetism.